When I was a kid, my dad, we would go on little tiny country tours. And one of the things we would do is to come to this particular grave site and try to look for that clay pipe that supposedly marked Grandma Barnes's grave site, because the grave marker, of course, is not actually on her grave. It's just put there by a very kind couple from Plum Hollow in the 80s, and no one really knows where she's buried.
She was known as Mother Barnes and Old Mother Barnes as she grew older, but she did develop the name the Witch of Plum Hollow in 1869.
The idea of her being represented as a witch is part of her story, and certainly nothing that she ever seemed to shy away from.
My husband's family is from the area, and my husband had even been told as a little boy that if he wasn't a good boy, he would be taken to the Witch of Plum Hollow, even though she was long dead, but the memory of her lived on. My name is Elaine Farley. In 2014, I was first asked to interpret her. So since then, I have done numerous presentations and have continued to learn about her and share her story.
My name is Melanie Chismore, and I am a fourth generation descendant. Mother Barnes was my great-great-great-great-grandmother. She started telling fortunes because of her circumstances. She had been married once and widowed very young, and then she married David Barnes. And when they had had 9 children together, 7 of whom were still alive at this time, David left her, and that left her basically of her own means and having to create her own path. And so she started telling fortunes, but at this time for a fee, which was 25 cents. This cabin was basically, it's one floor within a small partial attic floor, and Mother Barnes would tell her fortunes in the upper level, and people would wait on the lower level, and they would climb up a very steep set of stairs or perhaps a ladder and get into that top. And I try to imagine an 89-year-old woman climbing up a little rickety ladder to get to the top level and tell stories and tell fortunes.
The table was in the upstairs of the cabin so that we know that this is where people came up and sat. And she would have tea leaves in a cup, and you would have to swirl it 3 times, and then dump them. And depending on the pattern was what she would tell you about your future. People came from all over this country. They came from the States to see her. The train station here in Athens had a special coach that took people from the train to her doorstep. Some of the most famous stories associated with Mother Barnes is the Dockstader murder in Charleston Lake, where she predicted when the body would be found and who had caused the death, which proved out in court to be accurate. There are also some fascinating stories of her finding clerical errors in bank records.
A person who couldn't get their books to balance, and so came to her and asked, well, I don't know what the problem is, and she said to go to this column and change these 2 digits to this digit, and he went back and did it. And when I tell this story to people, they were like, oh, well, she was probably just really good at math. And I didn't think to explain that she didn't have the ledgers in front of her.
There is thought that she was visited by Sir John A.
There is some debate about whether he actually did visit her or whether he sent representatives. He was the Attorney General at the time, but people locally will say that he has been here and that there is evidence of it somehow. The myth became part of her story as much as what she was actually doing, and I think she played on that as well and used that as almost an early marketing technique.
She was charging people 25 cents a visit. And she could see 8, 10 people, 20 people a day. So when you do the math, she was very, very smart. The average laborer at this time was making $1 a week.
Not only was she able to make ends meet, but she was even able to buy the cottage, the cabin that she lived in around 1861, which was impressive for a woman independent at that time. I first started noticing the coins here about 2 years ago, and there was only probably 5 or 6 here at the time. And now it seems like there's been a number of other visitors that have come along and left a quarter at the site.
The quarters are symbolic of what she charged people.
The people who've left it are willing to take the gamble and try to see if their fortunes are laid out for them in one way or another, thanks to leaving a coin. Now that my father has recently died, I feel like it's been passed to me as the next caretaker of both my grandmother's materials surrounding Mother Barnes and also just continuing the story. She must have been a very stubborn woman, just to have walked away from a life of privilege at her age and forced her own path, and not only get by, but to thrive and to be remembered is amazing. How many of us get to be remembered 130 years after our death? That's incredible to me.